Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and I know I stopped talking about Ultraman Blazar for a little bit. Not because I stopped watching it, but rather because Gamera Rebirth happened, and that took precedence. There have been plenty of Ultra series. Gamera hasn't been around for a while, so I prioritized that, and after going through every single episode, I needed a little bit of a break afterward. But I have still been keeping up with Ultraman Blazar, and since the most recent episode is a recap, I figured may as well do a little recap of my own and tell you how I've been thinking about the more recent episodes since I left off. In short, the show has definitely continued in some interesting directions. Like, you've got some really very experimental almost episodes. Maybe experimental isn't quite the word because it's still recognizable as an Ultraman episode, but like there's the one with the music, the aliens that come down. That's the one that introduced Garamon, or reintroduced I should say, and how he was controlled by these aliens who had come down to Earth decades before in order to invade, but then they discovered music, and it turns out Earth is the only planet in the universe that has music, and they just fell in love with it. That was a very different kind of episode, kind of thing that really made you dwell on the power of music itself, and the different ways it was shot and framed, and the way things were contrasted, and how Garamon himself functioned. It was all very interesting. Though it was another Omni-centric episode, I've noticed that Omni has so far gotten the most episodes focused on her of the whole Scar team, other than Gento himself. I don't know why that is. Not that I'm complaining, of course. Omni's a good character, but I just noticed she tends to get the spotlight on her more than the others, which I don't know why that's the case. I'm just noticing it. But otherwise, what other good episodes were there? Oh, I have to talk about this, of course. From the beginning, I've been saying that there are certain things I wanted the show to address, and I figured they weren't going to address them right off the bat, and it could be a while before we even saw them actively brought up. Well, several recent episodes have indeed brought them up. There were even a couple of things I wasn't necessarily expecting. For example, the dynamic between Gento and Blazar, which is turning out to not necessarily be as symbiotic as other Ultras have had it. It's not like... Blazar is clearly his own entity, as is Gento, and as Blazar is trying to learn more about the world around him, it starts interfering with Gento's life. And in turn, when Blazar is active and he's starting in on certain monsters, Gento starts interfering with him to get him out of different situations or stop him from doing things that would otherwise maybe not be the best course of action. And it's interesting seeing the way they play off each other. It's introducing this little bit of tension. I have seen it before, something kind of like this, where Marvel's Ultraman comic, which isn't focused on Blazar, it's focused on the OG Ultraman, they kind of tried doing something similar with having Ultraman and Shin Hayata sort of interacting with each other and maybe not always seeing eye to eye. There, I don't really think it worked as well. Here, they've only explored it up to a certain point, but what they have explored is very intriguing. They are clearly going in a direction where Ultraman Blazar and Gento are not always going to see eye to eye on certain things, and they're going to need to figure out a way to properly communicate and have that give and take. Otherwise, they might be in trouble. Speaking of trouble, of course, we also get more of a sense that they're not completely on the best of terms with humanity. I'm sure general humanity sees Blazar as good, but the military in particular clearly doesn't view him as the best. And we saw that set up early on. When Earth-Garon was introduced, there was that order. Take Earth-Garon, defeat a monster before Blazar does, and also, we don't entirely trust Blazar, we might need to count him as an enemy. After that, they kind of just let it drop for a little bit, but in recent episodes, they brought it back. With, I think it was Gibalga's episode specifically. That is his name, right? Gibalga? Pretty sure it is. Where they actually say, ever since Scarred was funded, not once have they actually completely defeated a kaiju on their own. I think the closest they ever got was that Earth-Garon managed to temporarily take down that one sea monkey monster, and yet even that wasn't really a permanent thing. He had to ultimately work with Blazar in order to defeat that monster permanently, and it was still Blazar who delivered the finishing move. So there is this underlying idea that the tension is building. Scarred has yet to really prove itself as a worthwhile organization. I mean, other than serving as support for an alien entity that the military doesn't entirely trust. So, again, they haven't gone all the way with exploring that concept yet, but they're clearly getting closer to some sort of catharsis. That catharsis might still be a little bit further down the line, but we have had the pieces being set. We've had an initial distrust of Blazar. We had an episode where Blazar had to fight Earth-Garon, albeit because Earth-Garon was under alien control. And we have these more recent episodes. I feel like there's going to be some sort of reckoning further down the line. We've also seen attitudes changing somewhat slightly towards certain kaiju. Specifically, like when we have Damaga show up, and Damaga's another previously introduced kaiju from the Ultra series that's making his debut here, this time with a new monster in the form of a baby Damaga. And with that episode, you could kind of tell where it was going. Obviously, they weren't going to introduce a parent-child Gorgo-esque dynamic and have those monsters be the bad guys. There's just no possible way, especially in a series that is ultimately meant to be a family series that kids can watch as well as adults. But even so, the way it played out, that moved the plot forward quite significantly. That was where we really started to get a sense that Gento and Blazar can be at odds with each other. And it was the first time that we had Earth-Garon specifically framed as a villain. Like, when he was taken over by the aliens in that one episode, he was not technically Earth-Garon. He was being manipulated. So ultimately, you couldn't really call him the full-on villain there, because it's, for lack of a better term, mind control, even though he's a robot. But in that episode, he was clearly the antagonist. He was clearly something we were not meant to root for. And they actually did a really nice job of depicting him as a villainous creature by making just a subtle tweak to his design for just that one episode, removing his pupils. We get so used to seeing his pupils and having that make him look more like a personified being, that removing them makes him look more evil. And also the way they frame him as he's attacking emphasizes that. It's almost kind of like what they did with GMK Godzilla. Almost, because GMK Godzilla's eyes are not solid white. They are white pupils set in black. But most of the time they just look white, and it creates that same effect ultimately. And of course there was the second two-parter with Gibalga that really continued to escalate things. And we even actually got a proper explanation, or at least more of an explanation, for a scene that previously had gone unexplained. The second episode of Blazar, we had a flashback to this moment where we were meant to assume Gento first kinda met Blazar, but we never really got a proper explanation for it. Here we got more of an explanation. I don't think we know the full story just yet. Clearly there are still questions that need to be answered. But now that we've seen a little bit more of how that ties in, like, you could easily have forgotten that scene even happened in the previous episode, but now it feels more significant. I'm curious to see the full extension of how they're going to explain it, because clearly this is where Blazar came from and where he and Gento made first contact. But why? What happened? What brought Blazar there? That is what we still need to find out. And I'm sure they will answer it. There's still plenty of space left to explore the story and all its different bits of nuance. But is the show going to remain that good going forward? Well, there is something else that needs addressing. One of the things I have praised Blazar for in the past, and other people have expressed similar sentiments, is how it's not a toy commercial. Other recent Ultra series have really been pushing Bandai products that you can get now in stores or online. And that became their primary purpose, to the point where it really wasn't feeling like a proper show anymore. Even compared to shows that were designed to sell toys like Transformers or My Little Pony or G.I. Joe or something, even stuff that's not made by Hasbro, it was still felt like it was going really over the top with it. But Blazar stepped back and went back to basics, taking the approach of the only selling point you need is just to make a good show. And when you get people invested in that show, they will want to support it however they can, including buying the merchandise you make. And so far it's worked. And so far they haven't needed to really push any sort of toy products. Not that they haven't introduced any, but when they have, like the Earth Garen Mod 2 or the Blazar bracelet or something, it's been naturally incorporated. It feels like it's just part of the show. But then we get the sword. Yeah, latest episode, not counting the recap. ULTRAMAN BLAZAR gets a new sword. I know it has a proper name, but I probably should have looked it up before making this. That's on me. And he ultimately does need the sword in order to defeat the monster, but the way that sequence is shot, the way it's framed, the way everything plays out, it feels like it's slipping back into the toy commercial habit. It stops feeling like it's a natural part of the show, and it feels like they are showing off a new toy. Even the way the sword is designed, how it functions and everything, feels more like a toy than a weapon. And, yeah, I guess that was the sort of thing we had to expect. Okay, so that took me out of the episode. It felt kind of unnatural. It felt like it went against all the stuff that was making ULTRAMAN BLAZAR good. But am I going to make that big of a deal out of it? No, actually. I don't think it's necessarily that bad of a sign. I mean, ultimately, future episodes are what will tell us if this was the point where ULTRAMAN BLAZAR jumped the shark, or if we want to stay on theme, jumped the Zigra. But for now, I think it's just one example of them slipping back into that habit. And, you know, considering it took them that long to get to that point, I'm not necessarily that concerned. Like, every other time they've done it naturally, we had one moment where it felt unnatural and felt like a commercial. Okay, just one moment out of so many episodes that have otherwise been doing quite well, that much I can forgive. As long as it doesn't become the main thing going forward. And I'm sure there will be other such moments. I've seen how many different Blazar stones come with the bracelet every time I look up this series on HobbyLink Japan. I know that there's going to be more stuff. It's just a question of what that stuff is. But it's ultimately going to depend on how they handle it. Are they going to fall back on the whole, we need to frame this like a commercial aesthetic, or are they going to keep introducing these things naturally and have it feel like it's just part of the story, rather than taking you out of the moment and telling you to go to your local store now and beg your mom for money? I don't know. Like I said, I'm not that concerned at the moment. As long as the show can stay the course, one or two or three or four deviations from it is ultimately not going to be that big of a deal. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. And beyond that, I don't have that much else to say other than... Hold on. Okay. I don't have that much else to say otherwise. Like I said, I'm just sort of sharing my collective thoughts on everything that's been going on rather than target each individual episode. But Ultraman Blazar still continues to entertain me. Even with that one little deviation, and even with other things you can point to and say, maybe they could have done better here and there, overall, still a very entertaining, enjoyable show. And I'm gonna keep watching it until the end, unless it does something to really lose me. But hopefully that doesn't happen. I'm rooting for this show, and I want to see it through to the end. And that's where I stand at the moment. So if you've also been following along, and really I do recommend it, you don't even need to be an Ultraman fan in order to get into this, then go ahead, hop down to the comments, share what you've been thinking of the series at this point. And yeah, here's looking forward to the next one, because that's apparently going to introduce some kind of stealth bomber flying kaiju, and he already looks pretty interesting, so I got high hopes for him. Or her, or it, whatever it winds up being. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.